Hey everyone, Jess from the Kidney RD coming in here for our daily live a little bit later in the evening this week with how my schedule has been. And this whole week is about potassium. A lot of things to talk about potassium, a lot of myths we're trying to dispel and to talk about. So I wanted to go through a couple of the big myths that surround potassium and just kind of break those apart so that you have some good idea on what you can do to keep your potassium levels in line and what you need to know. So number one myth is that high potassium hurts your kidneys. If you were here yesterday, I talked about this. Potassium does not hurt your kidneys, but if you have a high potassium level on your labs, then you may need to dig into potassium and what you need to do with your diet. So if your level is over 5 on your blood work, you may need to look at your diet and see where you might have some very heavy potassium foods and what you could modify. So if you're maybe consuming a lot of coconut or coconut milk, that's kind of a popular food right now for some people, that could bump your potassium levels up. Or maybe you're consuming a lot of juice and can switch to whole fruits instead. That could help with your potassium as well. And there are other things like potatoes, tomatoes, but really most often we see that when people's potassium levels are high, we really only have to target 1 or 2 foods to bring it down rather than just blanketly cutting out all high potassium foods. So number 1. Number 2 myth is that soaking potatoes removes potassium. No, that's not true. Soaking potatoes doesn't actually remove potassium. It's one of the biggest myths in the world of renal nutrition. So cooking the potatoes, especially double boiling potatoes, helps remove potassium. So that's a really good strategy. If you have a potassium restriction and you need to cut down potassium, those really heavy tuberous root vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squashes, if you'll boil them once, so big pot of water, cut them up, peel them, boil them once, about 10 minutes or so, dump out the water, put new water in and boil them again until they're very soft. You can remove a lot of potassium that way, but just soaking them, or sometimes people call it dialyzing their potatoes, which I think is crazy, but just soaking your potatoes does not remove hardly any, and that's pretty solid in the science. So don't get drawn into that myth. Just double cook them if you need to remove potassium. So number 3 myth is that tomatoes and potatoes are off limits if you have kidney disease, period. Don't eat tomatoes, don't eat potatoes, and bananas usually get thrown in there as well. You can absolutely fit in some of those favorite foods. If tomatoes are your favorite or potatoes are your favorite, you can fit them in. It's about portion size. So for example, tomatoes. One thing that a lot of my clients like is to have a little bit of a slice of tomato on a sandwich. And so, 1 slice of tomato is okay. There's hardly any potassium. Or they'll do like 3 or 4 cherry tomatoes in their salad, and they really love that. If you have a potassium restriction, a lot of heavy tomato sauce or like in a spaghetti sauce may not be your best choice, but there's other substitutes you can do instead. You can do red pepper sauces, can work really good. Pesto as well works really good. Potatoes, again, if you're going to include a little bit, it's fine. If you had a half a cup to 1 cup of potatoes a day, you would probably be just fine if you're balancing it out with some of your other foods. This is something that's really nice to work with a dietitian on because they can fit those favorite foods into your diet and tell you how much you can have. Tomatoes and potatoes don't hurt your kidneys. They are rich sources of potassium. And so for some people, they may have to limit them, but knowing how much you can have gives you so much freedom and so much flexibility with your diet. And we love giving people that freedom. Okay, myth number 4 is that this happens to me a lot. If my potassium level is high, my doctor said I can just take a medication to bring it down, so don't really worry about diet. I'm sorry, but I call that lazy medicine and lazy nutrition, is that when it can easily be modified with diet for a lot of people that we just use a medication instead. So if you have a higher potassium level and you haven't tried dietary changes, that can be a really good place to start. And some people do need, they call it a potassium binder. Some people do need that potassium binder, and in the right cases, that may be the right solution for you and the right way to keep that level down. But taking a dietary approach first when possible, can help alleviate having that extra medication, which often can come with side effects for a lot of people. So we really value taking a food first approach, because again, usually you can include a lot of your favorite foods, and sometimes it's just one little thing that's raising that potassium up. Going to tell you a quick story about that exact thing. So one of my very first people that I ever worked with bajillion years ago was an elderly gentleman, very careful about what he was eating, but he cannot get his potassium levels down. They always stayed high. So we kind of dug into it. He did some food journals. We looked at it really carefully. And eventually I found that he was drinking as a substitute for milk, a non-dairy creamer. So he'd buy the powder and mix it up, and then he loved it. So he'd drink a ton of that. On the label, it said 0 milligrams of potassium. So he thought there was no potassium in that product. Potassium is not super accurately labeled right now on food items. You have to be really careful. I called the company and got a little bit clear information, and it turned out that he was consuming a lot of potassium from that non-dairy creamer. And honestly, once we fixed that, bam, it was fixed. He didn't need to take an additional medication. We just had to swap that food out for an almond milk or, a cashew milk, something like that, that would work better for him. So it doesn't have to be hard. Sometimes it's a very little thing, and just getting someone to help you out to identify those things and take a real close eye at what you might be doing that might be bumping up your potassium can have enormous rewards. Okay, so in summary, 4 potassium myths. 1, high potassium foods hurt your kidneys. Not true. They don't hurt your kidneys. They just aren't always filtered out well. Number 2, soaking potatoes removes potassium. Not true. Double boiling helps remove potassium much better. Number 3, tomatoes and potatoes and bananas are forever off limits if you have kidney disease. Also a myth. They can be included in the right portion. And then number 4 myth is that I can just control my potassium with a medication, so I don't need to worry about diet. And also a myth is that diet first always has the most power. I hope that's helpful for today. Please join us. Again, I'm here every day. We don't have a predictable time, and I'm sorry, so you just got to click on my page and find it. But definitely join us here. You can look at some of my older videos on YouTube, or you can check us out on Instagram at The Kidney RD, where we post stuff for you guys as resources. Anyways, that's all for now. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.